I had chosen to save someone's life, right? But I'd never made the decision to let somebody die.
This is somebody who was a Navy SEAL who decided to get out of the SEAL team and buy a ticket and go fight ISIS in Iraq on his own.
This is the day that I get shot. I know that I'm going to get shot.
Like the tank is backing up. You're shot on the ground.
Dude, I turn around and I look, and less than 3 feet away from me is the tank. The tank tread. It's going to run me over. I'm 100% going to get run over by this tank if I don't get up and move right now.
And you are just about to die.
In the most violent war that the world has seen since World War II.
Today we have a very special episode, and today I have brought one of my friends, Ephraim Mattos, who's actually a former Navy SEAL sniper. But this is not just any SEAL story. This is actually one of the craziest, most violent story you'll ever hear. This is somebody who was a Navy SEAL who decided to get out of the SEAL team and buy a ticket and go fight ISIS in Iraq on his own, by himself. This is one of the craziest stories that I wanted to bring down to you. And the story goes in depth about what really happened. This is one of the most brutal conventional warfare since World War II. And I wanted to get through the details of what really happened in that battle between ISIS and the Iraqi troops, especially when there was no Americans involved in the fight at all, because American mission back then was to train and advise and not participate in the fight unless you were a jet fighter. But this is a different story for a Navy SEAL to go on his own and to kind of be just the lone fighter fighting with people that don't even speak his language. Ephraim, welcome to the Black Side Show.
Thanks for having me on, Habity. Super stoked to be here.
Oh, man, it's been a long time, and I'm pretty happy. And, man, you know what? I'm pretty inspired by your story. And when your story came along before it became a book, City of Death, and only for those who have seen war will understand what that means. When I saw your story before it was released and I got to know you and got to hear all about you from the Iraqis who were fighting in the front line, to talk about the battle that went on. And I want to go slowly through into why you actually made such a crucial decision in your life to go and do such a thing. I want to go back a little bit to a young white kid graduating out of a high school in Wisconsin. How the hell did you just decide I want to be a Navy SEAL?
Right on. So when I was in high school, I grew up in Wisconsin, and I knew that I wanted to be in the military. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. My father had been in the Air Force Reserves. He was actually part of air crew on C-130s, and so he had deployed over to Iraq and Afghanistan in the Middle East, flying cargo planes. And so I knew about the military. I kind of understood it. I grew up in a very, very patriotic household, and I knew I wanted to join the military, but I didn't know exactly what that looked like or what it is that I wanted to do. But I just started looking into all the different units that were out there. I started looking at Green Berets and Rangers and SEALs and all the different stuff that was out there. And for me personally, I looked at SEALs as being the most difficult challenge for me personally. And because of the water stuff. And I was actually sitting there. So it's funny. The reason I made the decision to go try out for the SEALs was because it was the one selection course that I looked at, and I said, I probably can't do that. And then I thought, wait, what am I saying? What kind of a soldier would I be if I back down from the challenge of going to SEAL training? Well, I'm not going to live my life telling myself that I can't do things. And so I decided, well, my chances are the lowest to become a SEAL. If I try out for that my chances of success are the lowest. So that's the one I'm going to go do. And so I decided to go be a SEAL. And 17 years old, enlisted in the Navy. 18, went off to basic training, and a couple years later, somehow by the grace of God, I made it through, and I was a SEAL.
It's amazing, man. I recently had some an older SEAL, from many classes, but classes prior to yours. I had Clerk Compostado, somebody was a SEAL during the 90s. And for you, what I like about your story, it was you were a young SEAL. You're still a young guy compared to the other people that I have seen and talked to or served with in Iraq. And, I know that you got deployed to Afghanistan, and you spent 6 years in the Navy as a Navy SEAL, done all this, all that. You know what I want to touch on is what was your Afghanistan deployment was like?
Hmm. So I got deployed to Afghanistan at a very unique time in history, especially with the U.S. military. The sort of if you look at the U.S. military's history timeline in Afghanistan, 2014 was actually a very pivotal time. So at the time, the current administration had made the decision we were going to start to retrograde and start pulling troops out of a lot of different portions of Afghanistan. So when I went to Afghanistan, normally a SEAL platoon, a conventional SEAL platoon, would do a 6-month deployment to their AO. Well, my platoon, we only did a 4-month deployment, and only 3 months of that was actual combat operations, because we knew that the base that we were working out of, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, we knew we were going to abandon it at the end of those few months. So we were going to be the last American troops there. So that was historically significant. But the other thing that was historically significant was because this was summer of 2014. So one of my jobs in my SEAL platoon was I was a JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller. What that means is you're a combat air traffic controller. It's your job to call in airstrikes and to sort of guide in aircraft and helicopters and deconflict battle space, but in the middle of a firefight, right? I was never the primary guy, but one of my jobs was to request aircraft for our missions. My job was to make sure before we went out on a mission that we had AC-130s and A-10s and F-16s and F-18s and Predators and Reapers and whatever we could get overhead to make sure we were fully supported for our operations. Well, toward as we were winding down our combat operations time, I started requesting, AC-130s like I would normally request, and sometimes I wouldn't get them. And the reason we didn't get the AC-130s is because not all the time anyway. It was because there was this new terrorist group called ISIS. And we were like, who's ISIS? What is ISIS? We've never heard of ISIS. What is going on? And they were telling us that the aircraft that had been designated for Afghanistan some of them were now being deployed over to Iraq. And we were very confused because we had no idea what was going on in Iraq as we were so focused on Afghanistan. So it ended up being kind of funny that I ended up being involved in Iraq and
And
ISIS.
what year were you in Afghanistan?
That was 2014. So it was
14.
2014 when all that stuff was going on.
And
But
literally, that's like the time Iraq was just falling apart.
yes, absolutely. And it was funny too. My roommate back in San Diego, my buddy Mikey, he was the primary JTAC that was in Iraq. He was one of the first guys that got put into Iraq, and so he was the one directing in all the initial airstrikes, taking out ISIS convoys. He was the one up there, basically the sole guy who was the air traffic controller for all combat aircraft coming into Iraq at the time. And we were just E5 shooters. But he obviously did an incredible job. So it was kind of an interesting transition time. But that deployment to Afghanistan was extremely violent. We basically could do whatever it is that we needed to do. If you look at a lot of wars historically, usually the beginning of the war is extremely violent, and then the end of the war is extremely violent. And in between is when the politicians and generals, they all come up with their grand plans, and there's all this bureaucracy and scheming, and the rules of engagement change all the time. But like I said, I was right there at the end, and we were able to do some really good work, obviously, as the SEALs. And we also had a group of paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne attached to our unit as well. And it was really an honor to fight alongside those guys as well.
It's kind of crazy because, for me, being someone who's an Iraqi who fought through what we call the ugly war, the surge in Iraq, 2005 to 2008 and 7 and 6, every year is worse than one another. But, being at war for 5 years, during my life I feel that we saw the ugly war, but you actually saw the ugly side of it. And, I say that because I'm part of these troops that some of it got killed and shot at and destroyed and demolished in Iraq. And I know what really went down in 2014. In 2014, that was the most devastating. I know a lot of Americans have never asked you that question because they don't know that. Mm-hmm. It was probably one of the most devastating times in Iraq. And now the war it's been a couple years since this ugly war has ended against ISIS in Iraq. I am finding more information more things that are mind blowing about this war. I just found out actually ISIS was actually at the borders of Baghdad. Like ISIS actually made it to the grave site, which is in the borders of Baghdad. It means ISIS literally almost took down Baghdad.
Hmm.
And that's, if Baghdad was taken down, all of Iraq would be in Islamic State right now. And ISIS would have taken the whole entire country, including Kurdistan. And I want to go back to how you got out of the SEAL team, and this is the one part that I'm amazed by your story and on your book and everything you have done. You get out of the SEAL team. How did you get connected with that side of the world when nobody was really cared about doing anything? No, everybody felt, look, the troops got pulled out of Iraq. This is all good. We don't have to send our sons and daughters, as some of the people say. And you decide to make one of the craziest Hail Marys of all time through history is
Hmm.
to buy a ticket and go to Iraq. And I know exactly who you fought with in Iraq. So take me back through that story. When you were in the States, how did you come across that?
Sure. So, my original intention for going to Iraq was to do primarily humanitarian work. I just wanted to see, if there was a way that I could help. And I'll take a step back farther. The reason I joined the Navy and the reason I joined the SEALs was because a lot of it was for very altruistic reasons. I wanted to go help people who no one else was helping, and I wanted to go to dangerous areas and be the one to go do that kind of work. And I wanted to go hunt bad guys and kill them, right? But doing that in order to protect and help other people. And so my original intention for going to Iraq was there was a humanitarian aid organization that was working pretty closely with the Iraqi army at the time, and I got in contact with them and it said, "Hey, I'm about to get out of the SEAL teams. Can I come join you guys and help out?" And they were, of course, they said, "Yeah, absolutely, we'd love to have you." So I flew out there to meet up with just a group of other kind of random Americans who were already working alongside the Iraqi army, had already kind of built those relationships and things. So I was kind of ushered into something that already existed. And um, but the process to get over there again was very, very simple. It was literally buy a ticket to Erbil, just on a normal flight, and you pack your bag. Yeah, so I had a backpack of stuff, and I flew out there to meet up with these folks and to see if I could help them out. And when I did meet up with them, everything checked out. Everything was good to go. And maybe a week or so after I got to Iraq, we drove off into the countryside, headed toward Mosul, which was the big fight that was happening at the time. And this was spring of 2017.
And that's the time that actually President Barzani actually got scared. He felt that Kurdistan was going to fall down. And he
Yeah,
actually pulled all the Peshmerga who was fighting in different side of the battle, and I remember he gave a general order and said, every Peshmerga and every post out there pull back to Kurdistan immediately, because he did feel they got closer to Erbil. And I know the fear and the craziness like behind this was insane. ISIS went from being a sleeping cell in Iraq to actually being someone that's conquered and controlled the whole country like a storm. And three Iraqi divisions get demolished in Mosul alone. And there are many
Mhm.
reasons. I know the truth behind why the Iraqi troops were losing battle. However, the one thing that got me interested to know is that you went there to help, and how did you come in contact with the Iraqi military? Like, how did that? Correct me if I'm wrong. It was the Ninth Iraqi Division that you fought with, correct?
hmm So the humanitarian aid organization that I linked up with, they had already built a relationship over the previous year or two by working with the Iraqi army, and they were working directly with it was the 36th Brigade of the Iraqi Army's Ninth Armored Division, and so. It was for me. It was also very bizarre. Just kind of observing all this. We got into. I think we had a small convoy of 5 or 6 Land Rovers, and we loaded them up with medical supplies and food for the team and all of our backpacks and such. And we just drove off into the Iraqi countryside to meet up with these guys. And we had to go through all these different checkpoints, just driving through the desert, a lot of times off road, to link up with this mechanized unit. Now, the 36th Brigade of the 9th Armored Division, they are an Iraqi army unit that is they're a mechanized unit. So they had tanks, they had M1 Abrams, they
It's the
had
only armored
T-72s.
division in the Iraqi military.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
It is the only armored division in the Iraqi military. And
Yeah.
you know, it's got established during my time when I was there in Iraq, because we
Oh,
didn't
wow,
have
okay.
anything. We didn't have any armored. And they started with BMB-1s and T-72s. And that
Mhm.
was the beginning. And they started forming this division. It was actually based in Taji, in Camp Taji, Iraq. And the story behind these guys, which you're not aware of, that was the only division where they couldn't just recruit any random people.
Hmm.
Because it's armored, you need it to be specialized. And if you don't know how to drive armored, you can't be in there. So what they did, they actually brought the former NCOs from the Iran-Iraq War, that fought during the Iran-Iraq War, that were specialized in armor. They were armored, MOS guys. And they said, hey, if you need a job and you are an armored guy, we will take your application and hand it to everybody. And at the time, I have met one NCO that actually fought in 1973 with Iraq against Israel and Egypt.
Oh wow.
Some of these dogs were old, man. Like, been
Wow.
at war forever, and they just came back, and they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll just ride the tank. And it's kind of interesting and historical to actually, because the 9th Iraqi divisions, for those who are listening, was not only being the only armored division in Iraq, perhaps they were the armored for all the troops that were fighting in Mosul. Because when they attacked Mosul, all armored went in front of the troops, as you remember, to open their line in front of the troops so the rest of infantry units can go behind them. But you kind of like went and just put yourself in the fire at the front line.
Hmm. And that's where the story takes a fateful twist for the for the insane, if you will. Again, so the first month or so that we were there, the first just couple of weeks, we really were just doing sort of the humanitarian thing. We were carrying weapons and such because, of course, it's extremely dangerous. But we're doing medical clinics and things of that nature, delivering food. But then during that time, we had been involved in one pretty major fight. But then what ended up happening was, as you said, the 9th Armored Division basically was ordered to attack West Mosul. So for the listeners, Mosul is a very large city, and it's split down the middle by the Tigris River. And at this time in 2017, the east side of the river had already been cleared. All the bridges were blown, but the east side had been cleared. Power had been restored. People are going about their daily life, not completely normal, but things are opening back up. The street lights are on. Their cell phone towers are working. However, West Mosul is where all the ISIS guys had retreated to. So they're jam packed in this very small, condensed urban battlefield. And historically, the old city of Mosul is traditionally most of it is located on that western bank of the Tigris River. So these old these old streets, which are very narrow and twisting and winding and perfect for
Where
defense.
no vehicles can drive through.
You can't get vehicles in there, and it's perfect for ISIS guys to pack in there. And every corner, every doorway can have a machine gun or something covering it. And so what happened was the Iraqi armies, I believe it was the I forget which unit it was, but it was the Iraqi army's Golden Division, and then I think ERD and a couple of other more specialized units were taking the western half of Mosul, but they were pushing from the south to the north, but they were just getting bogged down because the ISIS was so jam-packed in there that, I mean, how are you supposed to advance when literally every single door, every single window is covered by a machine gun? So the 9th Armored Division was ordered to attack West Mosul from the northern portion and basically open up a second front. That way ISIS would have to divert a lot of their troops back to the northern portion of West Mosul, and that would allow then both fronts of Iraqi army troops to be able to push in. Well, because we were assigned, because we were working alongside the 9th Armored Division, it was May 4th, 2017, when the actual when the day came, to finally open up the second front in West Mosul and really finish the last few weeks of clearing ISIS out of the city. And on that day, the entire Ninth Armored Division showed up. So again, we had primarily been working with the 36th Brigade. They had maybe 3 or 4 tanks, and then they had 5 or 6 BMPs, and then maybe a dozen Humvees. Well, we joined up with probably 5 or 6 other brigades, and so there's dozens of huge tanks, dozens of BMPs, dozens and dozens of armored Humvees, and they all lined up on this big field. If you look at a map of northwestern Mosul, you'll see there's this big open field basically between where the city starts and sort of the western plain regions. All the tanks lined up, World War II style, and all of them opened fire simultaneously, shooting into the city, taking out specific targets that looked like they would be controlled by ISIS. Of course, ISIS immediately opens fire. They're spraying machine gun fire back at us. They're dropping mortars. All of this has been pre-sighted. There's mines everywhere. And the Iraqi army just got online, these guys from the Ninth Armored Division, and they just charged. They just went straight across this probably 1 kilometer of open ground. Tanks were hitting mines, and their tracks were getting blown up. The ISIS was bringing out car bombs and blowing up the first few BMPs and tanks that were advancing on the city. Guys were getting shot, of course, lots of incoming fire and all that. And basically for the next 3 days, the Iraqi army fought around the clock for basically the next 72 hours, all day, all night, in an almost constant battle with ISIS, just to secure the first block in the city, just to be able to get a foothold. Because if the Iraqi army couldn't control that first block and those first row of houses, if ISIS could successfully push them out of those houses, then it would be months before the Iraqi army could even attempt to do another attack. So it was brutal, house to house, room to room fighting, and the Iraqi soldiers were nothing short of heroic. And my job at that point, basically, and the other humanitarians who were there, a lot of us are ex-military, most of us are ex-military, and we basically acted as combat medics. The Iraqi army at the time just didn't have a medical program set up, right? It had only been active for a couple of years at that point, since ISIS had taken over. So they didn't have a full-blown medical program. They didn't have even one actual medic assigned to the entire brigade that we were with. And so we were treating dozens and dozens and dozens of wounded.
Because Iraqis don't believe in medics, man. They believe once you get shot, you're done. There's nothing else.
Apparently that was the plan, but it was a really good thing that we were there. But because of that, we're going right to where the guys are getting shot, and so we're getting in the middle of gunfights with ISIS to extract these wounded Iraqi soldiers. But then on top of that, and here's where things really take a turn for the dark, was ISIS started to shoot the civilians who tried to flee and come to us. So these civilians, they've been living under ISIS occupation for several years at this point, and so they're excited. Their day of liberation is there, and so sometimes in packs of 100, they would come out and flee ISIS all at once. Sometimes it would just be a family here and there carrying what they could on their backs. But anybody who got in the crosshairs of ISIS would get gunned down, and they didn't care who it was.
They were actually trying to. I remember the feelings. They were trying to get as closer as possible to the Iraqi troops who are moving towards them. Mm-hmm. And their hope in life was to actually make it to the nearest Iraqi soldier that is moving towards Mosul. And if they do, they're outside of the ISIS territory. And the reason why, a lot of these individuals had young girls. The girls will be a danger being in ISIS territory. They could be taken as a sex slave. They could be being forced to marry an ISIS fighter. The possibilities these families went through. Some of these individuals I know personally has actually been shot physically in the body and decided to not get medical attention so they don't get seen. So the fact is they were terrified to get to the front door of their house because it's such ISIS control is not just ISIS being outside of your door. It means ISIS could take your daughter. It could rape your wife. It could do whatever they want. And especially if they don't agree with you. So I can't imagine the need that these families that had to, like, what was it for them? These troops moving towards them closer and closer, and they're already been under ISIS control for almost 3 years. That's like got to be terrifying. But I want to take you back a little bit, Ephraim.
Mhm.
What was the Iraqi reactions when, like, I want to talk about you in specific. Like,
Mhm.
what was these Iraqi soldiers' reactions when they see an American civilian right there in the front line? And I know what that means because I was training all the advisors here at Fort Polk, Louisiana. I briefed every single military personnel that, look, you're not allowed to participate in the fight. You are only there to train and advise. You will not be in the front line. And that was these were my words, and these were the US government wanted in Iraq at the time. What was the Iraqi reaction seeing an American civilian on his own right there behind the tank? Like, how did they react?
Honestly, their reaction was, I don't know how to explain it. It was more like, again, we don't speak the same language. We don't come from the same exact culture, but you would make eye contact with an Iraqi soldier. He knows that he doesn't know if you're from Australia or Canada or the US, right? But he knows you're not from there, obviously. For those who are listening, I'm super pasty white. And you'd make eye contact with them. And there was just this nod. There's usually just a general nod of respect. I'm with you. You're with me. We just nod at each other. And it was like, hey, man, we're in this together. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. It was just when all cultural differences, all racial differences, all religious differences, none of that matters when you're both standing behind a tank or standing, or in a ditch getting shot at by ISIS. At that point, it all goes away. And I would say we assimilated with them very, very easily, and we all got along extremely well. It was instant camaraderie, it was instant brotherhood, and it wasn't. I don't really know. It wasn't. There was no really having to explain why we were there. They just intrinsically understood. We'd occasionally have conversations with them through an interpreter or with Google Translate or something. But um, most of what I saw was gratitude, and they said, "Hey." Basically, they would say, thank you for being here. Thank you for helping us." And they also know that we're their medics too. And so um,
What did they hand you at the time? Did they hand you something?
Did they hand us something?
Yeah, did they hand you something in personal? Like, did they give you a weapon, ammo, any kind of things?
So the group I was working with, they had given our group a bunch of weapons. So we had AK-47s, we had rocket launchers, we had grenades, we had unlimited ammo, we had literally anything that we needed. And yeah, they would give us pretty much anything that we needed. Before the invasion into Mosul, they actually gave our small little group an armored Humvee, like an actual military Humvee that was specifically for
Wow.
us. And we put Red Cross and Red Crescent on it to make sure people understood it was a medical vehicle. And yeah, but it was basically we were just one of them. It was the assimilation was very simple. And yeah, it was
And
really
as you
probably one of the best
moved with
experiences
these
of my life.
Iraqi soldiers, as you moved with these Iraqi soldiers, you don't speak that language. You're coming from a different culture. They have no idea what side of the world you come from. Um, how did you connect and get to know them over such a small period or amount of time? I mean, this was not a day or two for someone to get to know one another. This was
Mhm.
just a moment that you had to think and connect with somebody and go to war, right, with this person. How did that connection form between you and them?
That's a really good question. I've never really thought about it. I think the connection formed a lot of times through humor. So a lot of times we would laugh about the fact that we couldn't understand each other. So when you're sitting in some bombed out house and bombs, missiles are or not missiles, but mortars are coming in or something like that, and you're just sitting there next to another guy, this Iraqi soldier or whatever. You start to laugh about the same things. You see that you cry about the same things. You see guys see their friends get killed, and you're there to give them a hug, kind of thing. You're there to you try to treat their buddy. Um, the connection happened, and I guess the relationship built very, very quick, just through shared hardship. And I think that's one thing that where men just in general, kind of taking a little sidetrack, we're men in general, we usually bond over hardship. We bond over shared experience. And so building that bond with these Iraqi soldiers was very simple because we're walking through minefields with them. We're getting shot at with them. I don't know the guy's name to my right or to my left. I know, 2 words of Arabic, but and they know 0 words of English. But just that shared camaraderie, and you just sit there and you share your meal with them, and you both see something funny and you both laugh at it. You've never spoken a word to each other, but you're best friends, and you take a bullet for each other.
And it's gone amazing to many would not understand. You're not going there with the U.S. forces. You're not going
Mhm.
there where all the U.S. military have all the resources and all the troops to come get you if you're in trouble. You are completely on your own. What it
Mhm.
means if it's insane to think about it. A Navy SEAL, a U.S. Navy SEAL, goes on his own to fight with Iraqis by himself among a foreign um, army that's not usual to him, don't speak his language. Um, at that time, if anything would have happened to you, there will be nobody there to get you. You're
Right.
completely on your own. This is one of the most brutal battles ever happened in Iraq history. Um, when you went to this, when you got into all this craziness and decided to do this, and I know that you were passionate about doing this. You were passionate about making that decision. Um, like, did you think you were not going to come back from this?
So when I went over there, again, my initial thought process, I was totally willing to fight, if it came to that, but I wasn't necessarily like chasing it. That's not my personality. I'm not chasing the high of the of combat. I didn't need to like prove myself or anything. So I wasn't really going over there in the mindset of, hey, I'm going to go, get in close quarter shootouts with ISIS. However, that is what happened, and so yeah, many times on that trip and during my time in Mosul and in the surrounding areas, I did think, yeah, absolutely, today I could absolutely die, and it was. And I'll also say this too, having fought in Afghanistan at a pretty intense time of the war in Afghanistan, the fighting in Mosul, and you've alluded to it several times. So somebody had later said in an article, it was I believe it was one of the generals who was involved in this in the strategy and such of what was going on in Mosul. But basically, they said the battle for Mosul and West Mosul in particular was the deadliest urban battle that the world has seen since the end of World War II. And we were there, and we'll get to this story in a bit, I'm sure, but we were there, and I ended up getting shot on the deadliest day of that deadliest battle when nearly 200, actually, at least 200 people were massacred by ISIS. And so the scale of brutality, the scale of death, the reason I called my book City of Death was because that's what it was. You make friends with somebody, and 2 minutes later, they're dead. And there is death and carnage and bodies everywhere: men, women, children, babies, animals. There is nothing but death and destruction everywhere, and it's palpable, and you can feel it. And it's an entirely different animal than the deployment that I did to Afghanistan. So when I was in Afghanistan, nobody in my platoon, one or two guys got like a couple minor scratches from like frag, or something. Um, but in Mosul, if you were in a group of 10 or 15 guys, that there's a very, very, very high chance that within 48 hours, at least one guy in that group is going to straight up be dead. Right. So I went from this deployment where we're fighting all the time in Afghanistan and nobody really got hurt because we just had the upper hand and it was just a totally different war, to now this was a World War II style war that was happening in West Mosul because both sides were roughly evenly matched. ISIS had the defensive positions. They were prepared. They knew what they were doing. They were extremely competent and courageous fighters. As evil as they are, that is the truth. They were very competent and very courageous, and willing to sacrifice their lives to take out as many of us as possible. And so, yes, the fear of death was there constantly, constantly, constantly. And toward the end of my time in Mosul, as things got more and more and more violent, as we pushed farther into the city, during the month or so that we were actually in Mosul proper, I knew toward the end. I knew it. I even had a dream about it. I was like, there, I am not. I think because my subconscious knew. I was like, I'm not getting out of this city without getting shot, and I don't know if I'm going to die or not. But I know for a fact there is no way I'm getting out of this city without getting hit, because it's just impossible. There's with what we were doing, with what we were working up on the front line with the Iraqi soldiers at this literally the tip of the spear. You are right here, and 20 meters away across the street is ISIS. This is it. Like there is no, you can't go farther forward than this. This is
Did
it.
you know that the Iraqi government suppressed the number of casualties the Iraqi
Yes,
military was given at the time?
yes, I am aware that they were suppressing that because they didn't want
Because we
to.
would lose the battle immediately if
Right,
we
and
actually have released the real numbers. And when I saw the real numbers sitting here in the United States, the crazy part is I was sitting here watching this fight on TV, and I have about 12 friends that I served with in person that I know. It was just a circle of close best friends, not people that I know.
Mhm.
About 12 people that I'm very close with were killed in that fight
Wow.
in different sections. And that's when I knew the Iraqi government actually is hiding something. And
Mhm.
when I would ask every single soldiers of mine who were fighting, like I had soldiers who were in the 14th Iraqi division and the soldiers who were in the 9th Iraqi division. I joined the Iraqi military when it was 150 people. Most of these NCOs who served with me end up going to different divisions and end up taking a higher jobs, higher positions, or NCOs or officers. And the crazy part is that everyone I ask will tell me, "Oh, I just lost tons of people." And everyone would
Mhm.
answer me the same. I lost tons of people. I lost tons of people. I said, well, how come the Iraqi government is not actually releasing this? And until one of the command sergeant majors I served with, actually at the time, he was the command sergeant major of the Iraqi special forces who were fighting in the fight. And he looked at me, he goes, if we release this numbers, he said, we will lose Baghdad immediately. He said, people will just run out of this battle. And he
Mhm.
said, do you really want to know how many people were killed in this attack alone? On the decision making of that attack, it was close between 15 to 30,000 people.
Mm.
And it was never reported, never was told. I can tell you that the Iraqis saw their neighbors and their friends and their best friends and the people who went to college with came dead in a box, but they never counted. A lot of people were being buried. If you went to Najaf, to the Iraqi grave sites, you would know, because you will see how many people are at the gravesite trying to bury their loved ones. And I mean, we're not talking about the civilians. We're talking about these are military soldiers, military personnel. And this is why the Iraqi government was depending on some of the militias. They were recruiting anybody at that point because the Iraqi military itself, as a Department of Defense, were just overexhausted, and it was done. And they utilized some of the C-130s they had to transfer dead bodies. I know that some of the pilots have told me personally that each time they traveled from one place to another, transferring dead bodies was at least about 100 to 180 person in those jets and the C-130s.
Mhm.
And the pickup, which you probably didn't know that back then, the pickup station for the dead bodies of anybody that gets killed in the fight in Mosul was Al Muthanna Airfield Base in Baghdad. And this was completely classified. The Iraqi people didn't know. I lost my cousin in there. I lost a nephew in there. I lost just close people that were in my circle that were in the fight. And I can't imagine what you saw was nobody in the world was able to see. The news was not able to see. So like I want
Mhm.
to take you back into when your video went viral. Most Americans here in the United States saw maybe 2 to 3 Americans are moving behind a tank. I want to go into the story about the Iraqi family that got gunned down by ISIS. And what I believe, based on the information I was able to get hold of from the Iraqis, there were some Chechnyan snipers who were extremely violent, fighting among ISIS. They were gunning civilians down. How did the order come in about saving that family? And eventually, unfortunately, there was only one little girl left. How did that go with you when you guys got
Mhm.
that order? Please take me through that.
Yeah, so I mean, this was definitely one of the most, pivotal moments of my life, and for the other guys that were on the team as well. So it was 3 days after my 25th birthday. So I turned 25 in Mosul, and then so it was June was June 1st, actually. We were called forward in the middle of the night to treat a bunch of wounded people. We were about a kilometer behind the actual front line at the time. That's where we would sleep, and then we would move forward to the front line to treat wounded during the day. And the Iraqi army called us forward, and so we went forward and began to treat people. And casualties just started coming out of the darkness to us, and wounded, and ones and twos. People are just pale from blood loss, women, kids, old men, everybody, and they're coming to us. They're just appearing in the out of the darkness up these streets, and of course, we don't speak their language, and but they just kept on saying that ISIS was shooting was shooting civilians. And so we started treating all these folks. We stayed up literally all night. So we would lay down. Mosquitoes were eating us alive. It was horrible. But we'd lay down. We'd sleep for maybe 20, 30 minutes or something, and then we'd get a call. The Iraqi soldiers would come wake us up and say, "Hey, there's more casualties outside." So we'd get up, and it was just a night of blood and darkness, and we using our red lights to not blind our night vision or give away our positions and such. And it was a really horrific night for all of us, and we treated a lot of civilian casualties. Well, dawn broke the next morning, and we went down to the end of the street toward ISIS's position, and we realized, we looked around the corner, and we saw dozens and dozens and dozens of dead bodies stacked in big piles, scattered everywhere. And they hadn't been organized stacked. They had all just been slaughtered on top of one another. And later on, we found out that the body count for that particular massacre of the people just in that one section of street right in front of ISIS headquarters was, I believe it was about 180 or 190 people. I forget the exact number. But that number doesn't count all the wounded who had died when the massacre had happened. So what had happened on June 1st was a group of several hundred people all tried en masse to get away from ISIS. And ISIS at the time was holding a hospital, which was at a very strategic position. It held high ground. It was a very secure, strong building. It had very good fields of view of large portions of what ISIS still controlled of the city. And so the ISIS gunners had just slaughtered all these people, gunned them all down in the back. And as we looked down onto we went up into these bombed out buildings, and we got a better angle to where we could see down onto the street, and we could just see piles and piles of bodies. I saw a young husband and wife, maybe in their early 20s or mid 20s. They had both been shot in the back and had died face down right next to each other. But between them was their maybe 3-month-old baby whose head had been completely bashed in. I think the father had dropped the baby when he had been shot. So he had clearly been carrying the baby, had been shot, and then the baby had fallen, and its head had been bashed in the broken rubble of the street where all these people were killed. And as we looked out, we saw pregnant women. I saw a man in a wheelchair slumped over. Somebody had been trying to get him out of there, but he had been shot, and whoever had been trying to move him was probably also shot. So it was this image that I see 100 times every day. It's imprinted in my brain. But when I looked at it, when I saw, my brain couldn't quite comprehend what I was seeing, because I've seen pictures of mass graves. I've seen pictures, black and white, fuzzy photos from Vietnam or from, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge or World War II or what have you. I'd never imagined in my life that I would see something like this in person. And we saw it, and the killing was fresh. None of the bodies were bloated. The smell, the stench hadn't popped up. Had all happened the day before. So
It was just a
as we're
different
looking
kind
out
of
on
war,
this,
wasn't it? It's just a different type of war.
it was a completely different kind of war. But also in the same way, just the same as all the other wars. It's just people just, slaughtering each other for one reason or another, and they make the excuses. But yeah, certainly a different kind of war than what we've seen in the last, 50 years or so, at least as like Americans, and the different wars and stuff that we fought in. And as we looked out, we saw a pile of probably about 20 or 30 bodies all stacked on top of each other where they had fallen. what had clearly happened is people had been shot, and then other people had been shot while trying to climb over the bodies of the other people, and then more people had been shot as they try to climb over those bodies, right? And so there was just kind of this pile up. But within that pile up, we saw a little girl. We saw a little girl hiding under her mother's hijab, I believe. I'm not sure if it's the correct term, but her mother's veil. We believe it was her mother. We don't know for sure, but we're pretty sure it was her mother. And just this lone little girl. And then there were also two men who were severely wounded, but who were hiding in the bodies as well. And the question you had asked was, how did we get the order to go? And the answer is, we never got the order to go. There was no order. We volunteered. It was the Iraqi army was not going to go, and rightfully so. I don't judge them for that at all.
And how long did it take you guys to get there?
So we saw this maybe an hour or so after dawn. We realized that the little girl was still alive, and we launched the actual rescue mission. I don't remember the exact time, but I want to say it was early afternoon. So it was maybe 6 or 7 hours later, I want to say, and I could be off on that by a couple of hours, but it was probably 6 or 7 hours later, maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But so we spoke with the Iraqis and we said, hey, we want to go get this little girl. The problem was, this little girl is in this pile of bodies, obviously in a kill zone. And we're the farthest forward troops in the city. There's nobody farther ahead than us. And ISIS is maybe 50 or 75 yards away on the high ground in two locations. So they have you flanked and they have the high ground. And that's their position. Nothing's even threatening them. And
if you think about it, Ephraim, that it's kind of crazy to know that there's a little girl that might be alive. You're taking a risk to move. And the Iraqi troops at the time actually were not moving as fast. We're very careful about every step they take. And at this time, you had to make a decision whether you're going to charge the enemy, who is ISIS, for the fact that somebody that might not be alive.
Well, so we did know for sure that she was alive. We could see that very clear, that the little girl was alive. But to your point, we didn't know if she was wounded. We didn't know, why hadn't she crawled away in the night? We didn't know, but she had been out there for, a little over 24 hours at this point. And the decision to go was never really debated amongst us. We decided, we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, all right, let's go do this. We have to find a way to do it. And so we spoke with the Iraqi army, and we also called the team leader of the group that we were with. He called the American military, and they actually put a drone overhead. They actually redirected a drone. He said, basically called them and said, hey, you guys need to see what's going on here. There's this massacre you guys need to get eyes on. And so the American military was actually watching this whole thing go down. And so basically we spoke with the Iraqis, and the Iraqis agreed to send out a tank that we could hide behind. And they an M1 Abrams, an American-built tank. And then they also agreed to send out a Humvee, which we would drive. Basically, the plan was we would take the tank, we would drive over all the dead bodies to get to the people who were still alive, and the Humvee would follow behind the tank. Meanwhile, that the tank was just going to be unloading as much as possible on ISIS positions. And then we were going to jump out, grab the girl, grab the two men, throw them in the Humvee, and just reverse out of there as quickly as possible. And it was maybe 150 yards into ISIS territory that we would have to go, and then we'd also have to get back that same 150 yards, and there's zero cover the entire time. There is zero. There is nothing to maneuver behind. There's nothing.
When I saw that location, I thought you guys were insane. You guys were in open land versus buildings that are hiding behind, and you are just exposing yourself to the enemy for probably a skilled enemy sniper that's hiding in these buildings. I mean, God, man, when I saw it, I mean, you guys were just blessed that none of you was killed that day, because this is insane. And this is clearly, even a tanker would know this is a suicide mission. Like, this is a dangerous move to open yourself up like that. So you guys basically made a crucial decision, and you just have to either save the girl or you could be giving a lot of casualties for this.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so to make matters even worse, right before we literally, I'm talking 5 seconds before the mission launched, the guy, the Iraqi soldier who was going to drive the Humvee, and he decided, he's like, hey, I'm not going to go on this, and he just straight up refused. Which again, I don't blame him. Like, what we were doing was above and beyond sort of the call of duty, if you will. Right? This was not. You would never expect someone to go do this, and the Iraqi army was prudent and wise to not send a full force of guys out there. This was totally a Hail Mary. Our one ace up our sleeve, though, the one thing that we did have, was that the American military agreed to open fire with their artillery and drop airburst white
Smoke walls.
phosphorus
Yeah.
smoke grenade, basically large artillery smoke grenades. That was the only reason why we're alive today. So the American military, as the Iraqi army tank pulled out onto the street to make this 150-yard dash down to the pile of bodies, right at that same exact time, the American military could see, so they started firing this artillery smoke screen, and so there's these huge explosions in the air. There's smoke. There's all this white smoke everywhere. These fireballs landing. The Iraqi army tank just immediately starts dumping rounds, both from its machine gun and its main gun, into the ISIS positions. The Like I said, the Humvee driver refused to roll, and we didn't have time, so we just immediately ran out behind the tank, and we're like, looks like we're going on foot. So we ran out behind the tank, and we basically tried to stay as close to the tank as possible. But as I'm sure you know, if you stand behind one of those M1 Abrams tanks, they basically have literally a jet engine in the back of them. So the heat from the exhaust is literally burning the hair, the small hairs off of our arms and off of our faces and such. And we're tripping over the bodies of the people who'd been slaughtered the day before, and ISIS immediately opens fire. So they're kind of firing relatively blind through the smoke, but they're opening up with machine guns and mortars. So they're firing just this insane deluge of machine gun fire is coming through the smoke from two angles. There's mortars dropping on top of us. There's bullets bouncing off the tank, slamming into the dirt around us, slamming into the bodies that are already on the ground. And the Iraqi army tank just charges straight at ISIS's position, going from basically a distance of 200 yards down to a distance of about 50 or 60 yards away from ISIS. And we just sprinted after the tank to try to keep up with it as much as possible. And so we get in position behind the tank. Again, there's just machine gun fire and craziness, lots of explosions, lots of bullets just hitting everything. And so the plan was myself and one of the other guys on the team, my buddy Sky Barkley. We jumped out from behind the tank to provide covering fire, while the team leader, the guy who we were following, he was the leader, a former special forces guy, a guy named David Eubank, and the organization he runs is called the Free Burma Rangers. That's who I was with at the time. And so Dave Eubank runs out and grabs the little girl. And again, keep in mind, we are 50 yards from ISIS. We are right there. We are firing point blank range. So Sky and I were firing directly into ISIS positions. I'm looking in the windows and firing into each individual window as I can, just to keep their heads down. Dave goes and grabs the little girl and brings her back behind the tank. And that was, I think it's 13 or 15-second clip. Is the one that went viral, and rightfully so. Dave did a great job. He ran out there, exposed himself to enemy fire, grabbed the little girl, and brought her back to safety, or relative safety, behind the tank. At this point, though, the problem was that we still had to get these two men as well. So the part that never went viral, there is video footage of it out there, but we ran back out with just the tank kind of firing with its machine gun. We ran back out to grab these two men and pull them behind the tank. So now we have two men who are non-ambulatory. They can't move on their own. And this little girl. And
that's where it gets scary, because you're slower. You're getting slower. You're getting slowed down by the enemy. And that's where it gets scary, because that gives the enemy the chance to really get up and look at you. And that could be the end. That could be a disaster for you. And I want to take you back a little bit. You were pretty much living the Vietnam times, because you were fighting with a gun with no eyesight. You are carried an AK-47. You are not a Navy SEAL full of gear and everything, and with the top-notch technology. You were with an AK-47 that actually the pin holder could break at any second. You could find yourself with nothing to defend yourself. So, like, how did you feel? You were like, well, this is not what I've been training for. This is not what I was hoped to have in my hands. But
Mhm.
somehow, even when I saw the video and it went viral, and I saw that, and for me, I was like, who the hell is this dude? It was just some white guy came up with a hat in his hat and it started fighting, shooting with an AK-47, and not just. I wonder, as a special operator, how was your trust with your gun at that point?
So my trust with my rifle was actually great at that point. So I'd been with that rifle for about 3 months. I had used it a lot of times. I personally cleaned it. I personally cleaned every bullet. I personally, cleaned the magazines. So it was my rifle assigned to me, and so I had good trust in the rifle. Now, the reason I was given that particular rifle by the group was so we had a hodgepodge of different AKs and things. But the reason I was given that AK in particular was because they laughed when they gave it to me. They said, "You were a sniper," and they were like, "Here you go. This one shoots kind of straight, actually. So this is our sniper rifle. This iron sight, I believe, it was a Yugoslavian AK-47." But no, I had complete trust in my equipment. But yeah, it was weird not having night vision and all that stuff, and my my M4 and all that. But the other thing too is I wasn't wearing any body armor. I didn't trust any of the body armor that was out there. There was some that we would find, but we had tested some of it and shot it, and some of the bullets went through some of it. And so I just decided, I'm not going to use any of this armor. I don't trust any of this stuff. So I was out there completely just literally just my vest, like you said, my backwards hat, and my AK-47, a little backpack with medical supplies. But for me, I was much more interested in moving fast, being able to keep my head up, rather than wearing a helmet or body armor. And some other guys were wearing helmet and body armor. Dave in that video, he's wearing a helmet and body armor, but he's also only carrying a pistol, right? So it was, you can
Yeah.
just whatever is that you need to have.
And
But no, I
speed in these kind
trust
of
you with it.
wars is very crucial. Like, it's extremely important.
Yeah, and fatigue. You have to be able to maneuver around and move quickly and fit through small holes, and because there's all kinds of tunnels and bombed out tunnels and things like that, where ISIS would they tunnel holes between buildings and such. So you just can't be the big bulky, um, carrying all this gear and all this
And I know
helmet
the
and
psychological,
shoulder
like, I know
pads
the
and all that.
psychological aspect of that when you're fighting and you haven't slept in days. There is a psychological beat
Mhm.
down to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of those days. It's actually funny, not funny, but kind of funny. The the that so the night before this rescue mission, we had basically gotten zero sleep. We had been getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, and that was when we weren't treating dozens of wounded people and dealing with that all night. And we'd of course been treating wounded all the entire day prior. So we're going on basically 2 days at this point of basically zero sleep. And I remember having the explicit thought, and I mentioned this in the book, I believe, but when I woke up that morning and we were going to go do the rescue mission, I remember having the exact thought in my brain. I said, you want to know what? This is why they make us go through Hell Week when you're going through SEAL training, and other units have their own equivalents of that. But with the SEALs, it's Hell Week, and I was like, this is why they do this. This is why they do it to us, because as miserable as I am right now, as tired as I am right now, I've been through worse. And that's what Hell Week was for us. It's this thing where it should never get any worse than Hell Week. And that just mental knowledge of, hey man, I've been through worse. I've been awake for 5 days and under worse conditions. Like, I actually got to eat last night. I got to, sleep, 20 minutes here and there, you know, like, hey, that's actually not that bad, you know? Um, and that's why they beat the hell out of you and have you go through those crucibles to join the different special ops units in the military. But
I mean, everyone saw Hell Week and saw firefights and been in these tough situations, whether warfare operators or any other military, troops out there. But for you, it's like you got to experience what Hell Week is all about because you put yourself actually in the hell battlefield. This was not a
Hmm.
normal battlefield. I mean, I say this a lot because I knew the background information of really what that battles was like. This was insanity. This was like basically your situation. The way I think about it, it was the movie Furry when Brad Pitt makes the decisions to use his tank and just kind of charge against, I guess, however Germans he can take. And that's the way I think of your situation is that you're out
Hmm.
there with one tank and you're fighting an enemy that is actually taking a defense position. You are in an offense position. You are more
Hmm.
exposed than your enemies.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. One of the things. So before I say what I'm going to say next, I'm going to caveat this by saying I would never, ever, ever in a million years ever pretend like anything I've ever been through was like D-Day. I want to be very clear on that. I'm not comparing anything I've ever done to like the guys storming Normandy. So I wanted to say that up front. But visually, if you watch the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, where the Germans are up in the machine gun nest and the men are they're after they get out of the landing craft and they're trying to get to that first seawall, and there's dead bodies everywhere, there's explosions everywhere, there's tracers and machine gun fire, and there's smoke sort of obscuring the German machine gun nests, but the fire is still coming through. That visual is what it was like on this mission. That's the closest I can explain to what it was like. It visually looked like that.
wow.
So again, I'm not going to say that it was like D-Day because it wasn't, but all respect to those guys who did that. But visually, that's the only way that I can explain what it was like looking at it from our point of view. You're just basically staring down the barrels of these machine guns. You don't see them, of course, and ISIS was not using tracers either. So you don't see any of the bullets flying. You just see the impacts and you hear them and you feel them going past you as you're running and tripping over the bodies of the dead, trying to get to the handful of people who are still alive.
What was your feeling when that girl got saved and you were able to get her alive? I mean, it's kind of tragic. Her whole family is killed. Um,
Hmm.
like, how did you feel within yourself? I know like these kind of feelings goes fast. You don't have the time for them. I know I saw a picture of you trying to like actually save some 80, 90 years old woman that was like on your side. It's one of the pictures that I've seen before your
Okay,
book was released. And it was just an
gotcha.
older Iraqi lady who could barely move. And I saw you
Hmm.
trying to run her towards either a
Oh, I know what you're
shelter or
talking
some
about.
kind of hole in the
Yeah.
ground or
Hmm.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
kinda like that actually that picture touches, right? Because I feel like the amount of danger you're putting yourself on to get someone who's that age to safety, I mean, it's crazy.
Hmm. Well, yeah. So I'll say, like, initially when we got, so I'll comment on the first part first. That when we got the little girl behind the tank and got the other guys behind the tank, at that point, the mission wasn't over. It wasn't even close to being over, and things were actually going to get way worse. So honestly, at that moment, there was no real relief. I mean, you're still in it. You're still in the fight. My hands were shaking. My adrenaline was pumping so fast, and I was like 90% sure. I was like, okay, I knew, I was like, this is the day that I get shot. I know that I'm going to get shot. So the fear of that sort of in the moment trumped any elation that we would have by having saved this girl because we hadn't saved her yet. Like we may all still die and lose her. And so when we got the two men and the girl behind the tank, we started moving the Iraqi army tank, who we were not able to communicate with. It just started backing up because it was being directed to do so by Iraqi army soldiers who could see the fighting that was happening, and they were talking to it on a radio. And so we just had to try to stay away from the tank. So the tank is moving back; it's not going to stop. ISIS is shooting at us. Mortars are going off. Machine guns are firing at us from two different positions. We're trying to drag these patients out of the way. We were dragging one of the men who I was partially responsible for moving, or I was responsible for moving. He fell off a litter that we were dragging him on. So he was actually about to get run over by the tank. So I grabbed him and I moved him out of the way of the tank treads. I'm talking for like less than the width of a hand. The tank treads missed this guy as I moved him out of the way. So this tank was not going to stop because it just couldn't. And At that point, I knew I couldn't save this man who we were trying to save. He was too badly wounded. I couldn't move him. There was no way I was going to get him up on my shoulders in time or anything like that. ISIS was shooting at us, and I couldn't get in front of this tank, or else I knew I was going to die because there's just too much incoming fire. And so I made the decision right then and there, where I looked at the guy and he looked at me. We made eye contact, and I just shook my head, and I was like, "Hey, I'm sorry," and I had to leave him to die. And I've said it before, but I made a lot of decisions in my life up to that point where I had chosen to save someone's life, right? But I'd never made the decision to let somebody die, and that was one of the times I've had to make that decision where I just had to let this guy die because I couldn't save him. There was just nothing we could do, and he did end up dying later that day. I believe he was shot. A couple minutes later, potentially. But so we had one guy and the little girl left. And right after I had basically had to make the decision to leave this guy to die, I stepped back behind the tank, and my decision was confirmed as being the right decision because that's when I got shot. A bullet came from our flank and tore through my right calf and just knocked me over behind the tank tread. And I sat there and I looked at my leg for just a second, and I wasn't sure. I didn't feel any pain yet. I was, as you know, bullets make that cracking sound when it comes through. And so I wasn't sure if the cracking sound I had heard was my bone snapping or if it was just the sound of the bullets coming past us. And, so I was sitting there just kind of staring at my leg in like mild shock. And then everyone else on the team started screaming at me. They were like, "Dude, get up, get up, get up." And they started hitting me. And so I turn around and I look, and this is all on video too. I turn around and I look, and less than 3 feet away from me is the tank tread. It's going to run me over. I'm 100% going to get run over by this tank if I don't get up and move.
And I got to tell
right
you,
now.
when I watched that video, I think this is one of the most craziest moments of the Battle of Mosul. Completely. When I watch that video, it's the way I see the tank is backing up. You are shot on the ground, and the tank is literally just 2 feet away, which is about to step on you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
just you literally, when I see that, like the tank is backing up, you're shot on the ground, and the tank is about to step on you, and you are just about to die. And when I look at that, man, it kind of crazy. I think that minute itself, it's less than a minute. I think it's not even 10 seconds. To see how
it's
these
maybe
10
like
seconds of war,
yeah.
God,
Mm-hmm.
man. I mean, I give you a lot of credit that, you got shot and you had like literally 5 seconds to make a decision to save yourself because there was no one even there to save you, because I can see the 3-4 people around you were worried about getting themselves covered. Nobody was worried about, was looking even. I don't even believe the people around you have noticed that you actually were shot. You got shot.
So I mean, obviously, if you watch the video, it's kind of difficult to see the context. They were aware that I had fallen down. They were aware that I was shot for sure, and they were screaming at me to get up because they were also aware of the tank. But to your point, there's no way that they could move me. I'm a big dude. Like you're not going to move me if I just kind of laid there and sort of tried to nurse the wound. But to their credit, they did scream at me, and I think there was a guy standing right behind me, and he started slapping me. And that's what made me turn around and look and see the tank. If he hadn't been there, if he hadn't done that, I would have gotten run over by the tank because I wouldn't have had the mental clarity to know that I was about to get run over by the tank. Because again, there's so much shooting. The tank's engine is so loud. There's so much incoming fire. None of us are wearing, or at least I wasn't wearing any ear protection during this entire fight either. And so I had no idea that there's a tank 3 feet away from me. I had no concept of it. But when I did see it, I realized, okay, I have to get up. I have to get moving. And like you said, yeah, you have less than 5 seconds. You just got shot. You have less than 5 seconds to make a decision to either die or save your own life. And so I stood up and I hoped that my leg wouldn't collapse underneath me. That was what I was thinking as I stood up. Because again, at this point, the pain hadn't set in because it's only been a couple of seconds. I don't know if my bone is snapped or not. So I stood up. Luckily, my leg held up, and I was able to limp forward, behind the tank, and I threw a tourniquet on and such. But even as I was throwing the tourniquet on, machine gun fire is still coming in at this point, and I'm just I'm like, oh, how about I basically I'm just hoping I don't get shot again. I'm like, this isn't fun. The pain sets in, of course. But there was also a moment right there too that's very important to me. As I was throwing my tourniquet on, I was walking. I faced toward the enemy, faced toward the incoming fire, but I was walking backwards, and one of the other guys in the team, I forget who it was, but he yelled. He's like, "Hey, look out!" And because I was walking backwards, I ended up tripping over the bodies of two little girls. One of them was maybe, I don't know, they maybe 10 or 14. I'm terrible with
Wow.
naming kids, but the one girl whose body I tripped on, and I looked down, and she's right there between my feet as I'm, blood's gushing from two holes in my leg. I'm throwing a tourniquet on, machine gun fire's coming in. I look down, and this little girl, her entire face is gone. She'd been shot in the back of the head, and her entire face, from her hairline of her forehead all the way down to her jaw, all the way out to her ears, was one big black hole of just flesh, because she had been shot in the back of the head, and the exit wound had taken her entire face off. And so, I'm standing there looking at this between my legs, and the stench at that point of the rotting corpses hit me, because it had just started at that point. And but it's one of those things where you just have to you have to stay focused on the mission. You can't think about it at the time. You can deal with those demons later, but you keep moving. But that little girl that you know that I stepped on and saw, to me, she is the literal nameless, faceless victim of all these wars. And that's why I do what I do now. I run a humanitarian organization, and we go to conflict zones, and we're not nearly as involved in the fighting and such, but we do a lot of medical training, and we work up in conflict zones and such. But that's why we do what we do. It's for the nameless, faceless victims, just like that little girl. But I just wanted to share that anecdote. That's a very important thing that happened in that moment. But the mission, again, still wasn't over, and so we pulled back to the point where we were online with the Iraqi army position. So we're back almost to friendly territory, but there was about a 50-yard gap between the tank where we had the two people who we had just rescued, and to get to the Iraqi army position. And again, our entire intention for this mission was to have a Humvee that was going to take us, so we wouldn't have to cross no man's land. Because at this point, the smoke is dissipating. ISIS knows that we're there. They see that we're retreating. So in their mind, they think that maybe we had just done a false attack or something. So now they think that we're weak. The incoming fire picks up even more. And so we started screaming at the Iraqis. We're saying, Humvee, Humvee. We're trying to get them to send a Humvee across this 50-meter gap, because if we try to carry these people, it's going to take us 2 or 3 minutes to do so. And you're 100% going to get shot. Like, no doubt, you're all going to die if we try to drag these people across. Like, no questions asked. But of course, there's too much noise. They can't hear what we're saying. They don't know what we mean. And so basically, I was had blood pumping from 2 holes in my leg at that point. So I knew I was pretty much useless to the team. And so I said, I said, I'm going to run across the street, and I'll carry the message that they need a Humvee. So I hobbled and skipped and ran as fast as I could on my wounded leg across the open. And the entire time I'm screaming, Humvee, Humvee, just in case. Maybe if I get shot in the middle, maybe the last word they'll hear me say is Humvee, and they'll know that they need to send a
And
Humvee or
I
something.
think I think it's a French reporter who filmed this whole entire thing, right?
There was a French reporter who filmed a lot of this, and then there was also the Free Burma Rangers. They had some guys from Burma who were also there filming, the war crimes and things,
I
and
just
so they
remember
caught some of this
I
stuff.
just remember seeing a video that
Hmm.
truly just kind of like, this is what got me to really just try to know who you were at the time, is a video of you by yourself limping through a neighborhood in Mosul. And it
Hmm.
looked like someone was actually on the roof of a house, was filming you while you just going through this little narrow neighborhood on your own.
Hmm. So that's actually that clip is of me running across that 50-yard gap. So I'm running across it is a densely urban area. You are correct, but that particular section was basically like a 5 or 6 lane highway that I was running across. But you can't tell that it's a highway because there's so much rubble and debris. But yeah, I ran across that open area to carry the message that the team needed a Humvee. And so when I got over there, I was screaming Humvee, Humvee, and there were several medics there. They immediately started working on my leg. And the coolest, honestly, probably my favorite part of this entire story is that French journalist who was filming this stuff. He turned his camera off, came downstairs to like help me. And the day before, it was literally the day before he had asked, he said, "Hey, can someone show me how to drive a Humvee just in case I have to?" And I remember I had made the joke. I was like, "Hey man, if you have to drive the Humvee, things have gone really, really, really bad." And we had all kind of laughed at that. But we of course made sure that he got training on how to drive a Humvee because it doesn't operate like a
Wow.
normal vehicle. And my favorite part of the story is this guy, he puts his camera down. He's just there, a neutral observer, hops in that Humvee. It wasn't an Iraqi soldier. It wasn't an American. It wasn't one of the
Even
other
the
volunteers.
reporter got into the
It
fight
was the
somehow.
reporter. He jumps in this Humvee, drives out under fire, drives out behind this tank. He's already seen me get shot. He's driving. He knows very well what he's doing, what he's getting into. And they load up the man, the woman, and the other rescuers on the team. They all jump into the Humvee, and he drives them back to safety. And to me, that 60 to 90 seconds of courage of somebody who didn't even have to be there. That to me is probably my favorite anecdote. And so much respect to him. His name is Bernard Genier. I hope I'm saying that correct. French reporter, but he's a really heroic thing he did that day.
And I'm glad you brought this story because this is the beauty of this is that these are people who are not former SEALs, they're not military, and they found themselves in this combat zone in this war, and they have to make this decision to do, and it just goes to show their heart. And I want to talk about a story really fast, and I want to talk about that the audience who are listening probably don't know that somehow in the middle of this fight, your brother showed up from where was he at the time? Milwaukee or Wisconsin?
I think he may have been living in California at the time, but yeah, somewhere he was living somewhere in the U.S.
I think to me, I'm
yeah.
sorry to discredit your story in a way. It's not heroic enough comparing to this, because the way I look at it, I mean, your story would make me cry, make me proud. Until I heard this story, truly, when I was like, before your book was released, when Scott McCowan had sent me a copy to look at it, when he's like, "Hey, look into this, see what do you think, City of Death and Ephraim, and you're Iraqi, what do you think of?" And I got to tell you, man, a bartender in California leaves his job, join his Navy SEAL brother who decided to make a crazy decision in his life and go fight ISIS in Iraq on his own. And he shows up to the middle of the battle. I mean, look, you are a Navy SEAL. You are a special warfare operator. You've been trained. You've been through Hell Week. You've been through Buds. You've been through Afghanistan. That is one thing. But when we're talking about a complete civilian who leaves his job as a bartender and shows up to the battlefield against the most vicious enemy in the world, ISIS, and decides to actually do the most dangerous job itself, which is actually driving ambulance. That was like insane. Ambulance had to drive to the front line, evacuate injured, and come out. Like at some point, I am 100% positive, and I did talk to some of the Iraqis that actually have served with you, and I just said, "Hey, what was your feeling about that?" They actually thought he was a special operator. Somehow
awesome.
He was a former special operator. They said he drove amazingly. This was a PSD trained guy, and I'm like, only if they knew he was just a bartender. So, like, how did this guy come into the fight and join the fight in the middle of this?
Yeah, so that's actually a great anecdote. Thank you for bringing it up. So the organization I was working with or was volunteering with, this humanitarian aid group, it wasn't just us military guys. There was maybe, I want to say, 5 or 6 of us sort of military guys who were up on the front lines treating wounded and such. But there were other American and Western volunteers who were there, not up on the front line, who were maybe a kilometer or so behind, and they would treat wounded at some of the casualty collection points and some of the aid stations and things like that. And they would organize humanitarian aid and other things. And so when I was there in Iraq, I think I had been there for maybe a month or so, and I called my brother. So my brother has done a lot of humanitarian aid work in like more places than I have. He's been to a lot of really crazy places. And so I called him up and I was like, "Hey man, do you want to come to Iraq and help, drive an ambulance or, whatever is needed?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, sounds good." So, and I don't remember what his job was at the time. I don't think he was a bartender, but it was just like a normal civilian type job. I don't remember what exactly he was doing at the time, but he was like, "Yeah, sounds good." So he leaves, and he drives out there, and we link up outside of Mosul. And actually, he linked up with our group before the invasion of West Mosul. So this was, like a month or so into the trip there. But so I took him inside when he was there, and I explained to him the situation. I was like, "Hey man, you're in a war zone now." And okay, he took everything on board. And so I handed him an AK-47 and I taught him how to use it. And I was like, I taught him how to take it apart, taught him how to put it together. I taught him how to load it, reload it, everything. We're using live rounds, everything. And, I made him drill on the AK-47, loading it and having it into a firing position from it being completely disassembled. I had him do that. I had to do that so many times until he could do it with his eyes closed. And I had him practice it on his own, just sitting in a room. I was like, "Go sit in this room, get nose in the corner, and you need to do this like 100 times, literally, and just until you can do it with your eyes closed. And I'm going to come back in an hour and I'm going to check, and you need to be able to do this with your eyes closed." And he did a great job. And so when we ended up getting into the Battle of Mosul, he wasn't up there in the front line fighting, of course, because that's not his background. But he was basically running logistics and driving an ambulance. And then as we got farther and farther into the city, it got to the point where he was throwing body armor on, hopping into the armored ambulance. We had an armored ambulance at the time, and he was driving at night and during the day in the middle of these firefights and driving up to the front to pick up wounded, throw them in the back, and get the hell out of there. Multiple times his ambulance was shot. There was one point where he had been standing outside of the. I wasn't there for this directly, so I didn't witness it, but the other guys were there, told me about it. They were standing next to the ambulance, and an ISIS sniper had dialed in on my brother we don't know what the distance was, but had taken a shot at him, and the bullet had missed and hit the side of the vehicle. And so my brother, it was my brother's first time getting shot at that time. So he had no idea. He had no idea what that was. He's like, "Oh, what is that noise?" And the other guy standing next to him, the Sky Barkley, the other guy, one of the guys on that rescue mission who was also providing cover fire. He was like, "Dude, we're getting shot at, like move." And so my brother just jumped into the driver's seat of this armored ambulance and slammed the door, this armored door, just as the second bullet came in, and the bullet hit right where his knee was. So he 100%, had he not moved, he 100% would have taken a round, probably in like the hip area. He's a pretty tall guy. He's like 6'4" or 5", something like that. So he would have taken a round like right in the hip. So yeah, I was extremely, extremely proud of him. He did an incredible job. Driving.
You got to think about it too. Like the ISIS sniper who's trying to kill him, probably thinking like, "Oh, this is probably highly trained CIA guy that I'm about to kill."
Exactly.
And on the other hand, you got just another white dude from California who got nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
That's insane. But man, I gotta. Yeah. This is amazing courage, though. But I wonder how your parents were feeling about two of you being in the most dangerous battle in the world, and by yourself, just on your own. How is your parents feeling about this? I know you come from a wonderful family that do humanitarian missions, that out there to help a lot of people through the world. But how did they feel when they saw that just both of you, like right now in the middle of this battle?
I've actually, that's actually a good question. I've never asked my mother about how she felt about us both being over there, but what I can tell you is when I told her that I was going to go over there initially, because initially it was just I was going to be the only one going, and I called her on the phone and I said, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to Iraq, and I'm going to go work with these folks." She started crying, not like hysterically, but she started crying a little bit, because I'd been to Afghanistan. My father had done multiple deployments to the Middle East. My brother had spent, I think at that point, more than a year traveling the world to different, living in different cultures and things like that. And her response, literally through the tears in her eyes, as I could hear it in her voice, she said, she didn't say, "Don't go." She didn't say, "All right, go, but don't be a hero." None of that. What she said was, you go help those people. That was her response. And so she's the ultimate, my mother in particular, the ultimate Spartan mother, with, with tears in her eyes. She says, go do what you got to do. Go save people, go protect people. And I haven't asked her specifically about what she felt like with us both being over there, but I guarantee you that's her answer. Her answer would be, my boys are out there making a difference. My boys are out there saving lives, and yes, I'm afraid for them, but that's how I raised them, And I know my parents are very proud of them, and my father the same way. Couldn't be more proud, and especially of my older brother, who didn't have the military background, but went there and did an incredible job, did a very, very admirable job.
And it's not just your parents that, should be proud of you. I think the whole world, man, should be proud of you. Iraqis that you fought with, that you gave them a service that no one was willing to give them.
Hmm. Well,
Again, there's not many people I know in the world that actually was willing to make such a decision and go, but themselves, and it's such a fight to help people. If there was a right moment to help somebody or to help another human being at the time, that would be the moment. So when I say that, not only Americans, even like every Navy SEAL out there, this was not a SEAL mission. This was not an American mission. This was a human being decision to make a difference in this world. Because if there was any representation for the SEAL teams, if there was any representation for a SEAL hero and from the United States to show courage, it would be in this situation, because you're showing up without the support of your brothers, without the resources, without the protection of the United States military. You're doing this on your own. And I think you represented the Navy SEALs and the armed forces of the United States and the American people well by doing such a decision, because I can tell you, to this day, the Iraqis you fought beside will never forget the things you have done. They're going to tell these stories to their children and their grandchildren, and every man you fought with in that tank that was there to protect you, every Iraqi soldier that was out there fighting beside you, will probably tell their children about this American guy that showed up out of nowhere to fight. And I think you contributed to changing the vision this generation in Iraq had about Americans. You know as well that a lot of us in Iraq thought Americans were a bunch of evil people who are out there to take our resources, and this was not true. This was not the reality. And I think you contributed to actually somehow to change the vision of how this generation thought of Americans. Perhaps every single young Iraqi soldier, not just from my generation, all the newer generation now, I talk to now, and they think differently of the American soldiers. They think differently of American. They think of them more in a positive way. So, you might have saved lives in this fight, but I think the change you have made to a whole generation is massive. It's big, because, if there was one Navy SEAL the Iraqi people will talk about today, it would be you. It wouldn't be anybody else, because you were not there in a deployment. You were not there to do your job. You were there to make a difference, and that's where it just makes a huge difference, And I think I think what you did over there, man, will never be forgotten. I think Iraq owes you big time. Every single soul that you have saved owes you big time on this. And nobody can thank you enough for it. And even when I saw your story, I still think about it. I'm like, it sounds like a fiction story, because you would think no human being out there would just go but themselves in danger, in this kind of danger. So I can't imagine, like, what was your feeling when you were shot and you and before I asked you that, I just remember something through my head. I wanted to ask you about a specific Iraqi soldier that fought in your side that I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, he ended up losing his life in the middle of that fight.
I believe the Iraqi soldier you're referring to, he survived. The guy who he was saving did die, unfortunately.
Wow. So like
Yeah.
I remember you telling me back then that you saw this person like literally put his life in danger to
Hmm.
save like 9 or 10 people. Um,
Yeah.
how did that like I can't explain the bond that you had with that person.
Yeah. So before I get that, I just want to quickly comment on some of the stuff you just said, and I truly appreciate the kind words and the gratitude. I just do want to make it very clear up front. There are a lot of not a ton if you look at the percentage of the population, but not a ton of people over there helping. But I was certainly not the only one. And full credit goes to all the other guys who did what I did and did more than I did. There was more rescue missions that happened the day after I got shot. Sky Barkley, Dave Eubank, those guys, they went back out the next day and were going into ISIS territory, not getting into gunfights, but they were secretly extracting people out of there. So there's a lot of folks who did a lot of really good stuff. Kevin Johnson, Justin Demoranville, my brother, his name is Zebulon. There are a lot of guys out there who did a lot of really good stuff, and I hope that my actions represented the best of all of us, but I certainly wasn't the only one. And the just specifically like the rescue mission, the cameras just so happened to be rolling. Um, Other guys have done things 1,000 times more heroic than I ever have or ever will do, 1,000 times more selfless and courageous, and the cameras weren't rolling. It just so happened that they were when I had my few minutes of you know behaving myself well, if you will. So I just want to make that very clear too. I hope that my actions reflect well upon the other SEALs, the other Green Berets and Rangers and Special Ops guys and the infantry guys and the other guys in the military and the Marines. I hope that my actions are a small glimpse into what these other guys have done, and 1,000 times greater than anything I ever have. So I just want to be clear on that. To go to to go to the question, where you're asking about the Iraqi soldier who saved a bunch of people's lives. So there's an Iraqi soldier. His name was Muhammad, and he was kind of assigned to us. He was very interested in learning English, and so he would just kind of hang out with us all the time. And he was kind of awkward. It was really funny, but he would try desperately to speak English. He'd speak 2 or 3 words, and we loved this guy to death. He was awesome, and he would hang out with us, but eventually he got assigned to us as being sort of our driver. So he would drive the Humvee that we were given by the Iraqi army and sort of be like a little liaison. And so he hung out with us a bunch, and we trained him up on some medical things. Well, during that initial May 4th push into Mosul, I was in the armored vehicle. I was in the armored ambulance, so that I was in charge of the armored ambulance. But we had the armored Humvee, which went into the city first, and this was when we started seeing the first intentional sort of civilian casualties, ISIS shooting people in the face and things like that. And ISIS had shot maybe a 10 or 12-year-old girl. They'd shot her in the back of the head and had blown out one of her eyes, and she was laying on the ground unconscious. And they'd shot her father standing next to her. And the other guys in the team, the guys from Burma, Dave Eubank, Sky Barkley, Kevin Johnson, they jumped in that armored Humvee with Muhammad, and they drove down into the line of fire where ISIS was. They got out. They got the little girl and the father. They got them in the Humvee, but at this point, their Humvee was so shot up that it stopped working. So their engine had taken, and you know how tough those Humvees are. This is like the amount of incoming fire. I believe it might have also been hit with an RPG or something. I'm not really sure, but it got disabled from the overwhelming amount of incoming ISIS fire, and so they're
Wow.
pinned down in this Humvee that can't move. Dave, he gets on the radio. He's screaming at me to try to send in reinforcements. So I'm screaming at the Iraqi army. We're sending tanks and stuff over this hill to go basically provide a blocking position for them. Well, as this is happening, Muhammad, the driver, he realized the situation. He realized that help wasn't going to get to them fast enough. Nobody really knew where this team was or what was going on. And so he got out of the Humvee, ran up this hill under heavy ISIS fire. Keep in mind, you are in the kill zone,
Wow.
and bullets. He's running in a zigzag pattern up the hill. I didn't witness this. The other guys told me this. He ran up this hill in a zigzag pattern, bullets slamming into his feet. He gets up to the top of the hill to safety. He grabs a Humvee and he drives it back down. He drives it back down to the uh, down to where the disabled Humvee is. Again, keep in mind, there's this entire time ISIS is just dumping rounds into both of these Humvees. RPGs are coming in. The only return fire is Kevin Johnson. He's up in the he was an ex Green Beret. He was up in the machine gun turret, and he's trying to keep his head down. Bullets are landing in the turret, and he's getting pelted with shrapnel, and he's trying to fire back and keep the vehicle as safe as possible. Anyway, Muhammad gets the Humvee up close to the first Humvee, and they start to they're going to transport the patients over. Well, the other interpreter in the vehicle, a guy named Shaheen, he stepped out of the Humvee to get into the second Humvee, the good Humvee, and immediately got shot. So he got shot in the stomach and just fell over. So Muhammad, instead of just staying in his Humvee, Muhammad got out of his Humvee, got shot, went over to Shaheen, got shot again, picked up Shaheen, got shot again, put Shaheen in the back of the Humvee, closed the door, got shot again, went up to the front door of the vehicle to get in, got shot twice again. He got shot in the shoulder, he got shot through his elbow, he got shot and through his neck. He took 6 rounds this entire time to help Shaheen, the Yazidi interpreter, get him into the functioning Humvee. So with more than 6 bullet holes, but 6 after having just been shot 6 times, he then drove the Humvee back up the hill, put it in park, opened the door, and collapsed, and was immediately medevaced. And Shaheen was also medevaced and was gotten out of there. And a few days later, Shaheen ended up dying from sepsis, we believe. He just got an infection and just killed him pretty quick in the hospital. But Muhammad miraculously survived. And then the other guys who were trapped in the Humvee, Justin de Moranville, him and another Iraqi soldier, Justin de Moranville had fought in Fallujah, and he had gotten 3 Purple Hearts just during his I think he was only in the Marines, I think, for less than 2.5 years, I believe, not even that long, and got 3 Purple Hearts on his first deployment. Anyway, him and an Iraqi soldier, they grabbed another Humvee, drove down, threw on some towing cables, again, all this under fire, and drove the Humvee back up to safety. And they were actually able to save that little girl who'd been shot in the head. She ended up surviving. And but those guys who rescued her, they've been able to meet up with her and the father. So both of them survived and got out of there. And so that guy Muhammad, what he did, he also healed up totally fine, and he's alive and healthy, and his family's good to go.
He's like the equivalent of 2 times Medal of Honor recipient.
1,000%. If the Iraqi army, I don't know what their equivalent would be, but if he had done what he had done in the American military, without a doubt, he would have been put up for the Medal of Honor. If he didn't get it, he would have gotten, 1 step lower than that or something. But he absolutely deserved the Medal of Honor.
I think it was the most beautiful story I've ever heard. It makes me proud to know, I served in the Iraqi military. And, there's many stories, unfortunately, but Iraq does not recognize to Iraq, this is just another day in the fight, right? Yeah, whatever. You get shot, it's nothing. But I feel like, it just goes to show the bond and the difference in some of these people, which I appreciate you telling this story. And I saw that you mentioned him in the book. And, unfortunately, a lot of people do not talk about their Iraqi partners in a positive way. Unfortunately, here in the United States, recently, some veterans who served during my time or whatever don't kind of show the truth about some of these things, or they may have seen one bad representative. So I actually appreciate you bringing something that was insane, that was super heroic off an Iraqi that went above and beyond the call of duty to save his buddy and to save people's lives, and whatever he is, this guy, I think that guy is a real hero, man. Hero.
Absolutely. And one of the things too that I was absolutely, my book, I dedicated it to the men and families of the 9th Armored Division for facing ISIS on behalf of the entire world. And that's what people don't really understand, was ISIS was a global threat, certainly a regional threat. and had the caliphate been able to establish, had they been able to establish the caliphate, and if we were still dealing with that today, thousands and thousands of people would be dead all across the world. Terrorist attacks would have happened all across the world. So these Iraqi soldiers who were fighting, they weren't just fighting for Iraq. They weren't just fighting for Mosul. They weren't just fighting for Baghdad or whatever city that is that they came from. They were fighting for the entire world, and people don't understand that and they don't recognize that, but I do, and I see that. And I will say too, the Iraqi soldiers that we had worked with, they didn't have the same level of training, of course, that I had, or that the Marines and Green Berets and Rangers and stuff, the other guys who we were working with, the other volunteers that were over there, they didn't have the same level of tactical training that we had. But I'll tell you what they did have was they had heart and they had courage, and the things that those guys did, it was unbelievable. They'd watch their best friend die. They would weep, and we would try to treat their friend as best we could. We'd have to look at them and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, your friend is dead." And they would weep, and 20 minutes later, they'd load their vehicle up, or not even 20 minutes, 5 minutes later, they'd put a stoic face on, hop in their vehicle, and head back out to the front line. And they did this again and again and again and again and again and again for years. What people also don't understand about the Iraqi army's, air quotes, deployments, was, I believe at the time, the Ninth Armored Division in particular, I don't know how the other units did it, but I believe they're doing like 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So from 2014, 2015, all the way to mid 2017, these guys were in heavy, heavy, heavy World War II level fighting for a couple weeks on and a couple weeks off. They'd get to go home if they could even afford a bus ticket, or if it logistically worked out to even get home, and then they would go back on. So that's an average of being deployed for 6 months out of the year, all year round, for 3 years straight, in the most violent war that the world has seen since World War II, at least on the urban battlefield. And the courage that those guys showed, there wasn't. I can say this honestly. There was not one Iraqi soldier who, if you sat down and spoke to him, anybody who had been in for longer than a year, there's not one Iraqi soldier that I ever spoke to who couldn't point to at least one wound on their body. All of these guys, and most of the guys that I spoke to they would say like, "Oh yeah, I still have metal in my arm here," and like, "Oh yeah, this is where I got shot in the leg over here, and then this is where I got shot in the shoulder." Totally different time. And these guys had multiple wounds and injuries, and they came back and they continued to fight, and they were nothing short of heroic. So I personally get super heated when I hear guys sort of disparaging, like, "Oh, it was just a bunch of ragheads, a bunch of savages, like, dude, like, go jump off a bridge, like, no, like, you're a terrible human being, and you have no idea what the hell you're talking about, because I promise you wouldn't have the stones to do what most of those guys did, and I don't have the stones to do what a lot of those guys did, what a lot of the Iraqi soldiers did, to fight for their country, but also so you don't have to go, so we don't have to go, so our families are protected."
And usually this doesn't come out of, like, I've never seen this come out of actual combat veterans. And if ever did come out of a combat veteran, it would be a veteran that actually never got to work with Iraqis, who probably was inside of the base, never met one, never spoke to one. And I think that is, those who have that touch and have worked side by side Iraqis and fought among Iraqis understands the value of working and fighting with people that don't speak your language, come from a different culture, different religion, but that bond and that brotherhood you can form with them. Look at all these Americans I fought side by side during my time in Iraq. We became family. We became best friends. To this day, every one of us is just out there for one another. And the same goes to you. Your generation might not have seen what you have saw. It's kind of rare for you. You put yourself in something that it could damage you to the rest of your life, but I think you made big difference in this world. You represented this country, not just the armed forces, in a perfect way to the Iraqi people. And if there is a big number, which it is now in Iraq, of the new generation that stopped hating America, it's because of people like you, what they have done. They don't carry this hate. That they don't believe what Iran and other countries tells them about America. they got to see an American shows up in the front line, gets shot just as much as they were getting shot, but his life in danger, and had no interest in it. Had no interest in it in any way. And that's why I'll always separate your story from other people, because you were not ordered to do this. You had no interest in being there,
Hmm.
other than just being helping people, helping human beings. And I know where you come from is completely different, and it's you do this anywhere in the world. And I wanted to, before we close this, where do people find you? And I know
Hmm.
City of Death. It's one of the best books I've ever read. It made me feel that like whatever I saw in Iraq was at completely nothing. Other than the book, The City of Death, that was written by Scott McCoon, the person that wrote American Sniper. And you
Hmm.
guys did an amazing job in it. And I will never forget the quote that I put in that book, which I'm proud
Hmm.
of,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
I'll never forget these words, right? Because when I read your story and everything that I've been through my life, and when I made that little quote about what you have done there, and it truly came from the bottom of my heart. And when I said it, it's not about the numbers of lives you take, it's about the numbers of lives you save. And
Hmm.
that's a law that I have learned through my time in Iraq. And I'm glad I put this in your story and not mine, because it is where it belongs. It's not about the number of lives you take. It's about the numbers of lives you saved. This is what you could be proud of. Closing your eyes, putting your head in the pillow, at the end of the night, is the
Hmm.
people you saved, the people that are walking this earth today because of your actions and because of the decisions you have to make. Where could people find you at from, other than the book, The City of
Hmm.
Death?
Yeah, so if people want to check out the book, it's just obviously City of Death. It's on Amazon or Audible or whatever you're into. And then I'm on Instagram. I'll be getting more active on there again. Just Ephraim Mattos. I haven't posted, I think, in like 2 years, but I plan on being a little more active starting again soon. And then the organization I currently run now is called Stronghold Rescue and Relief, and our website is strongholdrescue.org, and we're a nonprofit. And we basically, my full time job now is we go to conflict zones and we do humanitarian aid, emergency medical support and training, and then also refugee protection when that's needed. We're in Ukraine. We work heavily in Burma, and we've been to a lot of other places to basically help people in conflict zones. And again, the motivation there is that nameless, faceless girl from the rescue mission whose body I stepped on. Um, that's why we do what we do. We do what we do to prevent that and to protect as many people as we can in conflict zones.
And that's what I love about your organization. And this is what I love about what you do, is not, no matter what happens here, you guys don't care about the politics. You guys don't care about what anybody says. You guys are out there to make a difference and save a human being lives, no matter where they
Mhm.
come from, who they are, what backgrounds they have. And I hope people can donate to this, because if you ever really want to donate to something for a good cause in your life, this is the right organization to do that.